As you know, here in this finance class, you've got two areas of finance to be concerned with. Textbook problems and stuff that I give you. I hope to have the sample final exam up, if not by Friday, certainly by Monday. And that will include material, not necessarily the textbook, and I told you before, I'm going to drag you back through a couple of the time value of money calculations. You've got to be able to do the retirement program, you know, how much do you need to save per month for when you retire. You may have to do, and I don't recall if have we done break even in here?
We did in your other class.
That was in managerial econ. Yeah, okay, we'll leave that aside. We won't worry about it. Time value of money. Oh, I know one real quick to share with you. You remember the Snappy Strickland Lending Emporium calculation?
Yeah.
This is right out of Business Week magazine this week. Many of the larger banks in the country, not all, but several of them are going into the payday lending business because they've been capped on what they can charge us on our credit cards and our service fees and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So they're starting to do payday lending. This was the term. This is from one of the larger banks in America. For every $20 you borrow, we're going to charge you $2 fee per week. How much interest are they charging on that loan?
2%?
Is it 100?
Close. Huh?
Is it 100 and something?
No.
83%.
No. You said 10%, right?
It's 10%.
It's 10%, $2 for a $20 loan for 1 week.
500.
So there's 10% interest times 52 weeks. They're charging 520% interest on their loans. And they're doing it with a straight face. Those folks need it. We're here to help them. And what do you think is happening? The people who are really hurting for that kind of money, many of them, they come in and they take the first loan out, and they barely get by, and then their paycheck comes in, it pays off the loan, but they haven't got enough to get through the month, and they go back and borrow again, and again, and again.
They obviously present it this way because it doesn't seem like it's all that much money.
Exactly right. And, you know, I can understand that a lot of the folks who need these loans, they're not really good credit risks. They're barely getting by month to month. There's a high probability many of them are going to default. And if the bank is going to take those kind of risks, they're entitled to a higher return. I think that's common sense. 520%. Wow.
And people probably don't realize how much.
And, well, just about very few Americans would recognize this anyway. And the probabilities that these folks are going to recognize it, most of them are working down there at fairly low wages. They probably are working with fairly low educational levels. They're not going to know it at all. Now, to the liberal left, this is called preying on ignorance. As a business, you're preying on, you're living upon the ignorance of your customers. And so to the liberal left, this is pretty sinful, if you will, to the extent that they say anything about sin, right? But for the right, what do the people on the right side say? What does the true capitalist say? Nobody's forcing them to borrow this money. Nobody's holding a gun to their head saying, you got to take out this loan. Isn't one of the fundamental underpinnings of American capitalism something called caveat emptor? You ever heard that phrase? What's a caveat? Anybody seen that? A caveat is a warning. Caveat, da-da-da-da. Oh. Emptor is the buyer. This means let the buyer beware. If you go out and buy something stupid, it's your own damn fault. If you go out and take a stupid loan, it's your own damn fault. You should know better. So, should we rely on people to rely on themselves and know what's going on? Or should we make this egregious and illegal and outlaw it to protect people? And if you outlaw this, what's going to happen? What will these folks say? These very people who need the money, if you tell me I can't charge you more than 20% interest, Ain't nobody going to loan them any money. They're not giving them any money anywhere. So what's worse? No money at all, or money at 520% interest? And I can tell you, if I didn't have any money at all, that 520% interest I wouldn't even slow down. Give it here. Let's go.
Is this a popular type of loan nowadays? I mean, I've seen them around.
You see them in little strip shopping centers and stuff like that, but now the big banks are moving in to do that, which tells you they're scrambling to make every dime they can. And I'm doing the very best I can in front of you right now to show you both sides of the argument. I think you ought to put the bastards in jail for doing that. I think that's just absolutely, and I mean 520%. Yeah, if they could get 40%, 15%, 50%, I don't know, something down in close to the range of reason. I don't know. But
isn't this the kind of mess that we, is out there with, people buying houses they couldn't afford and
Sure,
things like that,
sure.
and letting people, do whatever they
sure,
want
but
to do.
to what extent should we protect them? And you can say, well, they're on their own. Okay? This ain't you ain't mama's baby anymore. You got to take care of yourself. You got to make grown-up decisions. But then you ask, and now I'm leading into economics, if millions of people go out and borrow too much money and buy too much house for what they can afford, and it goes broke, does that penalize the rest of us too? Sure it does. The economy collapses. And some of us who had jobs and were responsible with our money now don't have jobs because the rest of the economy is collapsing, spending is falling. Remember spending, key to the economy? And suddenly we don't have a job. So are we protecting these folks from themselves? Or are we also protecting ourselves from seeing them all in large numbers go?
Can this affect the way the banks, if this doesn't go well, can this have the same kind of implications as, the housing market did?
Sure.
Some similar
Sure, you'll have these same people losing whatever assets, if any, that they have. And the banks are stepping in and saying, well, before it gets too bad, we cut them off. Yeah, after they're fairly well, deep in debt, and now they're worse than when they started. There is something out there called the Dodd-Frank bill. This is the bill that aims to re-regulate the financial industry, Wall Street, in the United States. Because the argument is, before Dodd-Frank, we had a system that separated banks. You had two types of banks. You had, let's say, commercial banks, which is the ones you and I use. We make deposits, we take out loans, we write checks. And then you had investment banks. And investment banks did things like when a company wanted to sell their stock and raise a few $1 billion, they placed that through an investment bank. And investment banks were very much into investments, and some of it very speculative. The Glass-Steagall Act said, you're either this or you're that. You can't be both. But in around 1996, I think it was, under Clinton and the Republican administration, they repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, and banks could get into both lines of business. Now, the problem with that was, here you are a bank over here, and you're holding millions of dollars in deposits, and every account is insured for, what is it now, $200,000 by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And so you're sitting here, let's say, with $50 billion in deposits. And what happens if you invest them somewhere and lose them? The government pays the depositors back. So why not go ahead and invest the money? And so when this line became blurred, you had a lot of transactions taking place in the banking system that in many cases put depositors' money at risk, but the depositors were never at risk because they were backed up by the government. So the banks would go ahead and feel free to do whatever the hell you want. It's called moral hazard. It's when you can take a chance, and if you get caught, you don't have to pay it back. So now, after the financial crisis of 2008, they passed Dodd-Frank, which is aimed at a lot more oversight, a lot more limitations on crossing the line, and it includes something called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And this is a federal, top-level federal agency that's going to look out at financial institutions and ask, are they taking advantage of and abusing consumers? So I wonder what the CFPB is going to do to these payday loan things at 520%. I'll be curious to see.
You said they have a cap on other things like credit cards and stuff.
Yeah.
But they don't have a cap on this yet.
No,
Because it's new.
relatively. Many years ago, and there's still, in some states you still have them, you have usury laws. Usury is the practice of lending money at an illegally high rate, assuming there's a law. And for a long time, the usury limit in most states was 18%. You couldn't charge more than 18% on a loan. Well, that meant anybody who was very risky couldn't get a loan, because before you loan them money, you'd want 25% or 26 or 28%. Because that was limiting a lot of loans, they wiped out the usury laws in a lot of states, most states. And so now you see things like 520%. And it's a pendulum swinging. Too little regulation, too much regulation. Back and forth, back and forth. Just one more mention here. Newly elected Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts. She's a Democrat who defeated a Republican senator. Is Massachusetts pretty Democratic or pretty Republican? It's extremely Democrat, okay? So the fact that Brown got in the first place surprised people. But she came back and beat him. She's the woman who set up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now she's a senator, which means it probably will have even more visibility and strength. So we'll see what happens, see if they overdo it. So there's a fascinating world out there, I think, about what's going on with banks and investments and interest rates and consumers and Snappy Strickland and his lending emporium. And if you don't understand that stuff, get ready to get taken advantage of. Okay?